During the Hellenistic period, the status of women improved quite a bit. There was also the introduction of cotton, mostly because of the expanding empire and the access to it, as well as improvements in technology. The textile prowess of women, which had already been highly regarded, really ascended to the level of being extremely gifted weavers. Essentially, weaving was expected to be a desirous activity for queens and goddesses, let alone common women. So most people were able to weave with great ability in the home. The things that they didn't do in the home were things that like dyeing and fulling. Fulling is when you take wool and you weave it, and then after it's been woven you intentionally shrink it before you do anything with the fabric, so that it creates this really nice dense weave. And also when you use it, you wash it later, it won't shrink as much. These dyeing and fulling create a fair amount of fumes in the home, or require larger equipment that most homes would not have, and so those would be done elsewhere. There was a fair amount of embroidery and pleating fabric as well, but garments were still draped for the most part. The map itself looks a little something like this. So Macedonia, this is where Alexander the Great was from. And here's the border with the Persian Empire here. And so this essentially is the world at the time. Here is your next statue. You can see that they are not having as much of the structural issues as they had before. There isn't as need for as much support. There's with marble, you always need a base here. So there's the tree behind him, but he's called the Scraper. It's one of the conventional subjects of ancient Greek votive sculpture. It represents an athlete caught in the familiar act of scraping sweat and dust from his body with the small curved instrument that the Romans called a strigil. The sculpture is slightly larger than life size. So you'll see this one next to the other sculptures and see the progress that the Greeks were making in their artistic prowess. Corinthian columns. It's an odd story, but we believe that the Corinthian column represents acanthus leaves growing around a votive basket. It's named after the Greek city-state of Corinth, to which it's very connected with the period. There was a sculptor who was probably an Athenian who drew these acanthus leaves around the votive basket, which is traced back to the late classical period. And so the first actual Corinthian capital was seen in 427 BC. Here's sort of an image of him, a romantic period image of him seeing this sort of votive basket left for one of the gods or whatnot, with this plant growing around it, and then he struck with beauty, drew the thing, and now we have Corinthian columns. So the Corinthian order is the more ornate of the three orders, also being the final order moving forward. The columns that are created with the Corinthian order are generally the tallest. There's a fair amount of detail to the molding. This is sort of this tooth molding here, whatnot. Lots of detail. One of the most famous Corinthian order temples is the Temple Olympian Zeus in Athens. It's a monument. It's a colossal temple. It's really, really huge. It was dedicated to Zeus. The Olympian part of it originates his position as the head of the Olympian gods. Construction began in the 6th century BC during the rule of Athenian tyrants who envisaged this building as the greatest temple in the world. But it was not completed until the reign of the Roman Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, some 638 years after the project was begun. And so even though we have very little of it today, some people have reconstructed what it might have looked like with these beautiful Corinthian capitals. You can see, so this is the real thing. You can see just how big this is in relation to the humans in the foreground here. It also had the most columns possible. So you can see there's not only one row of columns going around the entire border, but there are two going all the way around the border, and there's actually 3 on each porch. So that's amazing. Women are still wearing clothing similar to how they had been wearing their clothing. However, now they started tying them at their chitons at a very high, waisted just below the breast. And so I've got 2 statues here. This one's in terracotta. It's a middle-class woman. And this one is the dancing lady from 50 BC out of Alexandria. And so this is going to be the inspiration for the empire waistline that we will see as we move forward in time. Especially now we're sort of seeing this sort of cap sleeve sort of thing, as well as gathering at the shoulders. It's a major difference. Again, textiles being so greatly prized and having great weavers. We really see a lot of decoration in women's clothing, and really just more of the same. There is also the great altar to Zeus at the Pergamon. So the Pergamon is the same museum that has the Gates of Ishtar in Berlin. I actually got to see both of them. It's truly amazing to see these items. The reason why they were moved to the interior was to protect them. It is amazing when you go and see ruins. To people who grow up around ruins, they're just ruins, it doesn't matter. To other people, they are priceless intricacies that need to be preserved. There's always issues surrounding whether or not societies taking items from their rightful country is problematic. Usually it is, but there's larger discussions around that, which I'm not going to necessarily get into. That is the stuff of art history. But here we have the you can actually sit on the stairs. You can, get close to the columns, all of that. It's not as large a scale, but what's really, really impressive is the relief work that goes around the outside of the altar itself. It is opulently decorated. And so looking a little closer, a lot of it has worn away or been destroyed in various ways, but you can really just see how incredibly detailed and beautiful it is. So here's the development of sculpture in Greece. So we start with clear, rigid, Egyptian-like postures. We break that with contrapposto, and then we have even more movement and lifelike gesturing. Here are the 3 column orders on the same page. You can see here that that there's that very clear mathematical rhythm between the triglyph and the metope. You also have this very detailed frieze here on the Ionic, and then the detailed cornice work on the cornice. Here we have another example. And then here are some of the scaling, so you can sort of see a little bit some of the proportions. This side is Roman, this side is Greek. We'll get to Roman later. They sort of change things up, but it's pretty much the same. And so you can see the proportions as they relate to one another, Corinthian being the tallest. This will be very important to you because this is what you'll be quizzed on. You should learn all of the vocabulary words on here. It will be a fill-in-the-blank situation, so you should just study this. And to end on a positive note, here's some costume designer interpretation. BBC's Atlantis. Now it is called Atlantis, which didn't really exist, we don't think. So the costume designer had license to sort of not necessarily be entirely realistic. And so we have 3 members of the royalty to just admire the interpretation. Can really see here the Ionic chitin sort of straps, decorative, and they would not have had this sheer of a fabric necessarily. And this is clearly not made of the natural materials that they would have been working with. But you can also see this sort of crown and veil. And you may recognize this fellow from Boots Phase 9. He was Dr. Bashir, but he was also on Game of Thrones. So at this point, we will end this session. Please finish anything else that is in lessons, and we'll move on to the Romans.